How a Lunatic Published My First Story, A Cautionary Tale by Max Booth III. Max Booth III is an excellent author. He's written some of the best books I've ever read, including The Nightly Disease and Carnivorous Lunar Activities, I very much enjoy. And his novella, We Need to Do Something, about a family trapped by a tornado, was just made into a movie that's going to come out this year. So he's on fire. Uh, I've heard this story before told as we were hanging out. I scanned the article and was reading through and then stopped so that I could kind of enjoy it on stream for the first time. So I've heard this story before, but this includes email exchanges and some other things too. So it's a good cautionary tale about scams, and then Max Booth III is irreverent and hilarious. So I'm sure the article is going to be absolutely awesome. So let's jump in and see what Max has to say about his first story, Sale. Johnny Knoxville started his career with magazines paying him to injure himself and then write about the experience. Tasers, stun guns, pepper spray, all were used to inflict bodily harm for the sake of entertainment. The success of these articles led to the formation of Jackass, which solidified his career as a living crash test dummy. I grew up with the Jackass generation and still possess an impenetrable fondness for these boys. Yes, I realize they are now all men in their late 40s, but in my head they are still simply the Jackass boys. If you've read my novel Touch of Night, which again is also very, very good, you probably have also guessed a large part of my childhood consisted of performing ridiculous stunts with my friends while one of us filmed it. Thankfully, we couldn't figure out how to upload files to YouTube, so they mostly remained on someone's computer hard drive. Are they still on that hard drive? Sometimes this question keeps me up at night. I certainly hope they no longer exist. There's nothing incriminating on these videos, well, no major crimes at least, but they are certainly embarrassing. Nobody wants to watch old videos of themselves behaving like jackasses. I wonder how often Knoxville and the rest of the cast look back at early videos and blush. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're still proud. After all, without these past decisions, they would not be the people they are today. When I look back at the many regrets I have about how I approach certain aspects of shaping my own writing career, I try to remind myself of the same thing. I feel like I'm a pretty decent place right now, and sometimes I wonder if I would still be here if I hadn't first experienced total humiliation. Would I have still managed to get a screenplay produced into a full-length feature film without facing a ridiculous amount of publishing disasters? Are mistakes always a negative thing, or do they sometimes result in worthwhile consequences? Max, I've kind of given him a hard time in the past because he has landed some pretty decent contracts with publishers, and then more than once has had those publishers either go under or screw him over or all sorts of things. So even in his successes, he's hit some hardship. So he's gotten some of the publishers that I consider sort of bucket list kind of accomplishments for myself, and then he experienced the downside of those things. So his successes in the past have been bittersweet, but I think he's finally starting to enjoy some of the rewards, which he deserves, because Max Booth III is a great author. Which brings me to my purpose of this article, my first ever short story acceptance publication, which is something that is traditionally viewed as a tremendous achievement, and at the time I definitely felt pretty damn proud. However, as you'll soon see, I have plenty of reasons for that feeling to quickly fade. Writing this article required me to dig deep into my email history and read the exchanges made between myself and the publisher of the first accepted short story. After reading not only his messages but also my replies, I could not help but feel incredibly ashamed. I also couldn't stop laughing, which leads me to suspect there's not only an educational aspect of writing an article like this, but maybe you'll also find it as entertaining as I do now. Below, I've copied and pasted the entire email chain I shared with the publisher of my first accepted short story. When appropriate, I have provided an ongoing commentary to add further context. I am not going to name the publisher here, as he appears to have gotten out of the industry for good, and I'm afraid mentioning his name in full will summon him like some kind of shithead wishmaster. So, with that said, here we go. From Max Booth III to blank, sent Monday, July 18th, 2011, 6:25 p.m. Subject: zombie story submission. My first short story acceptance was or first time I was paid for a short story was a zombie story too. Now, if I can get a movie deal, maybe we'd be even. I read on Facebook, again, this is in the email he sent. I read on Facebook you were accepting one more. And seeing as I couldn't find anywhere else to submit, I'm sending it to this email. Hope that's okay. All right. The fact that he couldn't find it anywhere else is probably a bad sign. We are exactly one email in, and already I am deeply embarrassed. I read on Facebook is without a doubt one of the worst ways to begin any email. The context doesn't matter. Also, ending a story submission with "I hope that's okay." Honestly, it's a relief the person who received this email turned out to be a deranged lunatic. Otherwise, I'd feel even more humiliated than I already am. Keen observers will notice this email was sent in the summer of 2011, which was nearly a decade ago. If you're particularly skilled at math, I turned 18 years old 14 days before submitting this story. 2 months before that, I received my high school diploma. Don't believe me? I don't blame you. Luckily, I have proof. He had accomplished a lot at a very young age. He already had his own publishing company before he was old enough to drink, and so he had published one of my books at that point. And I was shocked to find out how young he was. It didn't bother me that I was working with him, but I was impressed by how much he had accomplished already at a young age with his writing career. So very, very impressed with him always. I realized bragging about having a high school diploma in the same article as my embarrassing short story anecdote might be counterproductive, but I already spent 20 minutes trying to find the above picture, so what am I going to do? Not use it now? I don't think so. Here's the publisher's response 17 minutes later. If you're wondering why the time is listed an hour before my previous message, I have to assume we were on different time zones and Yahoo couldn't figure out a more coherent way of presenting the data. All right, so Max Booth again, third again, same subject line. Thanks, Max. I'll be reading it at this very second, and we'll get back to you in an hour, misspelled, or so to say yes or no. If the answer is yes, you can get the signed contract scanned and sent back? ? And here we go, the first direct communication from blank. And we are off to a spectacular start. I feel I speak for the entire writing community when I say the one thing every writer hopes to find in a potential publisher is the inability to spell words like hour and answer. And boy howdy, it sure looked like I'd struck gold. Okay, let's continue. All right, same date, a little later. Yes, I can do that. All right, next response. Okay, I will let you know. Getting a few more in, so the best one gets into this antho, but I can probably use your story for another if it's still fun. Thanks. All right, next communication from Max. Cool, sounds good to me. I just saw on Facebook that you want it to be between 5,000 and 7,000 words, so that probably disqualifies my story, which is just over 4,000. Hope you like it anyway. Well, I got another one in just now that's the word count I need, but if you are game, I can still look at your story and use it for the next antho if you want. And for this other guy, I might not like the contract I send and walk away. If it happens sometimes, not often though. Next communication from Max. Yeah, that's definitely cool. Considering it for the next antho sounds pretty good to me. I can already tell writing this article that LitReactor was a terrible idea, and I haven't even reached the acceptance yet. Hey, speaking of acceptance, looks like I have a new email. Yay, let's take a look. All right, hi Max. Okay, here's the deal. As far as your writing style, I was fine with it. The only thing is that to me your story is more like a document by a scientist than a story, but it isn't that bad. It isn't that bad that I would reject it outright. I like it, but not enough to want to give you a book for it. In other words, I don't want to pay for it as I don't love it. But many writers could care less about the book and just want to be accepted and published. if that's you, then let me know and I will still use your story and put it in the Antho and send you a contract. If you say, hell no, I want compensation, that's fine, but then I have to reject this particular story and how you want to send more standard stuff with people talking and fighting, etc., or anything in between. I'm fine with whatever you want to do. Want misspelled. Thanks again for sending it so quickly. And if the answer is yes, you want in, I attached the cover art for the Antho your story would be in. Cheers. And there it is, my first ever story acceptance. I've read this email so many times since I first received it in the summer of 2011. When I first opened it, I was overcome with excitement. I was 18 years old and had been submitting fiction to market since I was 14. Rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection. 4 years of no thanks. 4 years of thinking I'd never be good enough to be published. Then bam, this effing guy comes in and tells me that every writer dreams of hearing, I like it, but not enough that I want to give you a book for it. In other words, I don't want to pay for it and I don't love it. What other emotions I have experienced while reading that email years later: rage, frustration, and especially lately, amusement. I do find it very funny now, which is why I pitched this article in the first place. However, there was definitely a time where I just mentioned the editor's name would have sent me shaking in anger. Also, if you're confused about this, your story is more like a document by a scientist than a story, but it isn't that bad that I would reject it outright. Line, that can be easily explained. The story, titled Mad, was originally written for a high school science assignment earlier that year. The task involved picking a disease of our choice, researching that disease, and writing a report about it. The task did not mention anything about disguising that report inside a short story about zombies, but for reasons that escape me now, I decided it would be more interesting that way. So I picked Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease and went a little nuts with it, and much to my delight, received an A from the teacher, which is far more compensation than I ever saw from the eventual publisher. Which, yes, if you read the acceptance above, you'll know the compensation being offered on this anthology was only a contributor's copy, and he couldn't even be bothered to give me one of those. Truly, I wouldn't have agreed to such an outrageously rude offer, right? Well, I mean, obviously I did. Otherwise, this wouldn't be an article about my first published short story. If you thought the acceptance was infuriating, just wait until you read my response. All right, so here's Max responding to that dubious acceptance. Hi there. To be fair, I actually didn't think there would be any compensation except for maybe a free copy of the book. And even if that isn't the case, I am still okay with that, as I will just buy a copy myself. So what I am saying is, yes, if you want to publish my story in it, I am all for that. At this early point in my writing career, I am more about getting my name everywhere as possible. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you. Jesus effing Christ, Max, you poor GD idiot. Oh my God. I understand why I emailed this, but I desperately yearn for the ability to reach back in time and punch past Max in the face. If you are a new writer and somehow have stumbled upon this article, please listen to me. Never settle for exposure. Back in 2015, I wrote a LitReactor article titled Exposure is Not Payment, Why You Should Start Respecting Yourself as a Writer. Here is an excerpt from that article where I basically subtweeted the publisher of my first accepted story. So again, this is a story by an article by Max Booth III on how sort of a scam artist published his first story when he was young and didn't know any better. So from the article on respecting yourself and not accepting exposure as payment. I've heard actual presses, in quotations, claim that contributor copies are not an industry standard, which is hilarious and a depressing statement. I've even seen some places refuse to dish out electronic copies, digital files that don't cost the publisher an effing dime to send. Publishers, again in quotations, come up with these laughable excuses, claiming they're afraid the PDFs might circulate. Basically, they don't even trust their own authors to not upload the anthologies on torrent websites. But the truth is, they're holding these back in the hopes that the authors will purchase a copy on Amazon once the book goes live. because that's their only real target audience. They don't have a fan base. They just have the authors they publish and the authors' families. If you do not receive a contributor copy for your work, then you're being ripped off, pure and simple. The book is published in print, then you receive a print copy. If it's an ebook only, then you get the ebook. If the book is in print and you don't receive a print copy or an ebook, then you've been effed. This is a common scam, and I've noticed among many micro presses that pop up. Typically, they start off by exclusively publishing anthologies. These anthologies will not pay anything. The press will accept 15 to 20 authors for each anthology, all writers who just started out, naive and hungry for any kind of publication. Authors find these open calls and then submit, and almost nobody is ever rejected. There won't be a contributor copy given because the publisher knows the author will buy a copy, maybe even a few copies, just so the author can see his or her name in print, and she or he will go around showing everybody and bragging. The author's friends and family will want to support the author, so they will also buy copies. There will be no author discount. It will be full price. You publish an anthology with at least 15 people and charge $14.99 for the book, plus shipping. That's $250 before printing costs. You do a dozen or more anthologies like this a year, and you start making serious income, especially when it's not just authors buying it, but also their families. In that article, I was describing an anthology mill, and that's exactly what Blank was doing. Again, the publisher that he's not giving their name. Publishing more books than anybody could possibly market with any competency, not offering any actual compensation, relying on the authors and the authors' families as the book's sole customers. He also operated under at least a half dozen different company names to throw people off his scent. What a racket. And of course I fell for it. Not only that, but I was happy to fall for it. This must be what publishers like. I foolishly assumed surely nothing shady could be happening here. So next email from Max. Wonderful, glad you're on board. No, it's to Max from that publisher. Wonderful, glad you're on board. And make no mistake, I don't make a habit of doing this. If I had been in a different mood, I might have just sent you a polite rejection and that would have been it. We'll send the contract later. Cheers. It truly baffles me now reading this again just how GD rude that he was in these emails, even after accepting my story. Is this what negging is? Oh my God, I was negged. Gee, I wonder how I responded this time. So again, Max went back when he was 18 years old. Cool, sounds great to me, and yeah, I figured as much. I'm very grateful. Thank you for this. LMAO. Back to Max. Hey, haven't heard back from you. Did you get the contract? Are you scanning or emailing or snail mail? Yeah, sorry, I was in a concert last night and have been resting all day from it. I did get the contract. I will print, sign, and scan it back to you sometime within the next hour or two. No worries, just checking. See, that story is edited, and I want to give it to my proofreaders, but I don't want them reading something that might not get in if the writer changes their mind. It's bad enough I spent the energy editing. I don't want to take up their time too. Thanks. The aforementioned concert I attended consisted of Streetlight Manifesto, Real Big Fish, and the Maxis. The last band mentioned there is particularly important in trying to explain the mess I'm wearing in the picture I'm about to show you, which is something I took on my laptop webcam while signing my first short story contract. I have no justification for the hat other than I was 18 and loved dumb hats. Oh, that's funny. All right. There's the picture too if you guys want to see it. All right, and thus ends the chain of emails chronicling my first short story acceptance. 10 years later, the anthology has received 1 unrated review and 2 ratings on Goodreads. Both ratings are 5 stars, and they were posted by the same account, an author from the anthology. This is the only review. I have to return this to my to-be-read shelf. I managed to read 1 story before NaNoWriMo started. Justice is served. Very amusing, by the way. And then my mother-in-law absconded with my contributor copy after babysitting for us while my husband and I were at HalCon. I don't know when I'll get it back, if ever. What a cliffhanger. Unfortunately, I could not figure out if the author's mother-in-law ever returned their contributor copy. Some mysteries are meant never to be solved, I guess. I wish I could say this also marked the end of the communications with this publisher and that I never submitted to one of his anthologies again, but of course this isn't true. Come on. You've read the article this far. You already knew I wouldn't end this easily. All right, subject, new authors, horror, antho, open. To all blank and blank writers. As writers, there are times we get... Hey, Clever, thanks for dropping in. As writers, there are times we get an idea for a story, and then after it's written, we don't know what to do with it or can't find a home for it. But damn it, the story is good, and you want to see it in print so others can read it too. Like the book of blank anthos already made by blank, 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 and blank, and blank imprint is doing the same thing. So if you have a horror story, any type, that's fun and you want to see it in print, send it to me by way of blank. Editing is still in effect. So just because you send it doesn't mean it's in, but hopefully it will be. There is no payment for this antho, like a book of blank, and the reason is that this is my way of helping you get your work out there. These books don't sell a lot, but I don't care. This one is made for the writers. Hope you either have something in your library or want to write that story that's been on your mind. All right, so Max says about that. 3 days later, I submitted a new short story to the anthology. This was also the same month I moved into my first studio apartment. After hopping on a bus from Indiana to Texas, I left my entire family behind and began living in a strange state alone. It was no one of these nights. It was on one of these nights, shortly after submitting my new short story, that I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. You know how when you submit a story, you include your telephone number at the top left of the manuscript because it's standard practice, but you don't actually expect anybody to, dial it. So yeah, guess who was calling me? Now I've done that a lot. I've shared, the phone number goes on story submissions, and I have never in my life had a publisher call me. So this guy was a little crazy here. What followed? Again, this is Max Booth III talking about his first short story submission or acceptance with a scammer. What followed was one of the strangest phone conversations of my life. It lasted at least an hour, if not longer. The man on the phone, who again I will not name here, talked about the same speed as a machine gun firing infinite bursts. His voice was only interrupted by brief snorting noises. I don't know for a fact that this man was drowning in cocaine, but this man was definitely drowning in cocaine. Oh, that's funny. The phone call started with him addressing the recent short story I had submitted to his new anthology. He informed me that while he liked it, there was no way in hell he could ever accept it under his current narrative structure. Evidently, stories written in first-person POV were too amateurish for his fine company. Again, a company that didn't pay anybody. And if I wanted to rewrite it in third person, then maybe he'd consider it. He told me to publish it. He published in their right mind. No publisher in their right mind would ever accept a story told in first-person POV. This then quickly transgressed into a paranoid rant about how other publishers and authors were out to get him and wanted to see him fail. I did not get much room to speak on my end, as he literally never stopped speaking. But I think I managed to fit in, a couple times. Eventually the phone call ended and I went to sleep. Fast forward about half a year later, the publisher manages to piss off the entire internet by screwing over one of his authors in a truly baffling way. I won't leak to anything here, as it was 9 years ago and there's no reason to reopen old wounds, but holy crap. In this particular case, Blank not only added a typo to the author's story title, but he also added an implied rape scene, although with other details seemingly from the editor's imagination. Things that did not exist in the story until after the author sent it to the publisher, and of course Blank did not send edits for approval before publishing. He released it and the author only discovered what had happened to their story after flipping the paperback open. The author emailed Blank about the situation, and if you've read the previous emails copy pasted in this article, then you can probably guess he responded like a true dickhead. So the author wrote up a blog post documenting everything that had happened, and it blew up, with people like Neil Gaiman even sharing it. Nowadays, nobody mentions this dude's name, and for good reason. I do know who he's talking about, but the guy's been out of publishing, fortunately, but he was notorious for being this exposure publisher that just took advantage of everybody. Nowadays, nobody mentions the dude's name, and for good reason. I don't think he's still publishing, at least not under any obvious names. This article was not written to expose anybody, as he's already been exposed and rightfully exiled from the horror community. Instead, I wanted to share the background on my first accepted short story, and I've done that. I hope you found it amusing. I also hope, if you are a new writer, you can take my past experiences as some sort of lesson. There are lots of grifters out there looking to take advantage of naive authors. It's not always easy to see the signs, especially when nobody else has written about getting duped. So consider this article a cautionary tale. If the publisher accepts your story while simultaneously insulting you, maybe just tell them to go F themselves. Also, don't submit to markets not offering fair compensation. Have pride in your work. Do not settle because you have a desperate desire to see your name in print. It's not worth it. It's never worth it. Oh, and if you want to read my first articles, my first accepted short story, I posted on my Patreon for free. It hasn't been touched since I turned it into my high school science teachers. So proceed with that in mind.